I'm Claire. 6 months ago, I sat in this very hospital courtyard, the weight of the world pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. The gentle April air, filled with the faint perfume of budding dogwoods and the distant hum of traffic, seemed like a cruel mockery. My husband, Ethan, was fighting for his life in the intensive care unit, and I felt utterly powerless. As I sat there, my mind drifted back to the day we met at the University of Texas in Austin. I was a 20-year-old junior, struggling under a stack of books in the crowded campus quad. One of the books tumbled to the ground, and before I could reach for it, a tall, lanky guy with sandy, blonde hair and a warm smile bent down and handed it to me. His voice was soft and kind as he said, "I think this one belongs to you." Ethan was different from anyone I had ever met. He grew up in a dysfunctional family. His father was an alcoholic who was often violent, and his mother was too weak to protect him or his siblings. As a result, he was frequently in and out of foster homes during his childhood. Despite this difficult background, he was full of energy, strength, and laughter. We started walking across campus together, chatting about our favorite professors and our shared dread of upcoming exams. By the time we reached the library steps, I felt like I had known him for years. Our relationship developed naturally. Study sessions turned into late-night coffee dates, and evening walks became stargazing on the rooftop of his off-campus apartment. He listened to my dreams without judgment and shared his own stories of struggle. I fell in love with his resilience and kindness. A few years later, we got married in a small church near my hometown. It wasn't an extravagant wedding, just close family and friends, but it was perfect. Ethan held my hands, whispered a joke during the vows that made me laugh through my tears, and kissed me like he would love me forever. After our wedding, we built a simple and happy life together. Ethan found a stable job, and I was in awe of his dedication. We often sat at our small kitchen table after dinner, sipping sweet tea and planning our future. We both dreamed of having a big family. Ethan, who had never had a real family of his own, longed for it more than anything. I could picture us with children running around the house, and I wanted it just as badly. But as months turned into years and pregnancy tests kept coming back negative, worry started to seep in. Our friends were having babies, and each announcement felt like a stab in the heart. Ethan would hold my hand and say, "Our time will come." But as the seasons passed without change, the silence grew heavier. We started visiting doctors. First, there were routine tests, and then more invasive procedures. Eventually, we were recommended in vitro fertilization. At first, it felt like a glimmer of hope. We poured our savings into the treatments, adjusted our schedules for medical appointments, and lived by cycles and injections. I remember the first time I saw the embryo on the screen. It was a tiny speck of light, but it represented all our hopes and dreams. I held Ethan's hand and whispered, "This is it. This has to be it." But each attempt ended in disappointment. I would find myself curled up on the bathroom floor, sobbing. Ethan never blamed me. He would hold me in his arms and say, "We'll get through this. If it doesn't work, we can adopt." Family is about love, not blood. But the longing for a child of our own blood was almost unbearable. I felt like a failure, and our relationship started to strain. Then Ethan started to get tired. At first, he brushed it off as long hours at work and the stress of our infertility struggles. But soon, his tiredness turned into something more serious. He started losing weight without trying, and he barely touched his food at dinner. I noticed strange bruises on his body, and one night, a nosebleed wouldn't stop. I was terrified and insisted he see a doctor. After a series of tests, the hematologist finally gave us the devastating news. Ethan had a rare blood disorder, and without a bone marrow transplant, he wouldn't survive long. I felt like the world was collapsing around me. I thought about all our failed attempts at having a child. If we had been able to have a child, maybe that child could have been his lifeline. I felt like I had failed him twice. In the hospital, the sterile smell of disinfectant and the beeping of machines became our new reality. I spent my days between the ICU and the chapel, praying desperately for a miracle. One afternoon, as I sat on a bench in the courtyard, I overheard two nurses talking. One of them said she had seen a man near a small town in the hill country who looked exactly like Ethan. I couldn't ignore the glimmer of hope. That night, as I watched Ethan sleep, I made a decision. I couldn't tell him yet, he was too weak. I whispered to him, "I'm going to find him. If there's even a chance, I'll bring him to you. I promise." The next morning, I packed a small bag and drove west into the hill country. The landscape changed as I drove further. Neat suburbs gave way to rolling hills, and houses became sparse. By late afternoon, I reached a tiny town that barely showed up on the map. I parked at a diner and asked an old man on the porch if he knew of a man who looked like my husband. He pointed me towards a cabin in the hills. I followed his directions and found a rundown cabin in the woods. A disheveled man with a rough face and weary eyes opened the door. The resemblance to Ethan was uncanny. I introduced myself and told him I thought he might be related to Ethan. He was skeptical at first, but I convinced him to let me in. His name was Lucas. He told me that our mother was a drug addict who couldn't take care of her children. He was the oldest and tried his best to take care of the younger ones, but it was never enough. When Ethan was a baby, their mother couldn't afford to feed him and left him at the hospital. Lucas had always wondered what happened to him. I told Lucas that Ethan was the baby and he was fighting for his life. I explained that he might be the only one who could save him. Lucas was shocked and emotional. After a long moment of silence, he said, "After all these years, if I can make it right, I will." The next day, I drove Lucas back to the city. The wait for the test results was excruciating. I paced the hospital hallways, praying for a positive outcome. Finally, the hematologist came with the news. Lucas was a match. The transplant process was long and difficult. Ethan had to undergo high-dose chemotherapy to wipe out his diseased marrow, and Lucas received injections to stimulate his body to produce extra stem cells. On the day of the transplant, I watched as the stem cells were slowly infused into Ethan's body. It was a simple process, but it held so much hope. The following days were filled with waiting and uncertainty. We were all on edge, waiting to see if the transplant would take. And then, one day, Ethan woke up. When Lucas entered the room, their eyes met. It was like they were seeing a part of themselves in each other. Ethan said, "All my life, I wondered if I had anyone. And here you are." Lucas stepped closer and placed a hand on Ethan's arm. "I should have been there for you, but I'm here now." They held each other, and I stood by, sobbing with relief and joy. It was a moment I would never forget. 6 months have passed since then. Ethan has regained his strength. He still has some scars from the treatment, but he is alive and smiling. Lucas has moved into a small house nearby, and he brought his young daughter, Lily, with him. Lily was shy at first, but now she runs around the yard with Ethan, laughing and playing. I often think about the difficult months we went through, the pain of infertility, the fear of losing Ethan, and the guilt I felt. But from that darkness, we found something beautiful. Our family was not what we had originally planned, but it was whole and unbreakable. As I sit here in the hospital courtyard, looking back on everything, I realize that hope can come in the most unexpected ways. From despair, we found strength. From emptiness, we found family. From loss, we found love.